The sky over Normandy was the color of ash, and the morning air carried the damp chill of the coast. Corporal James Turner lay on his stomach in the wet grass, peering through a slit in the hedgerow. His squad had been dug in for 2 days, watching the road that cut through the small French village of Saint Renard. It wasn't much, a handful of stone houses, a church with a leaning bell tower, and a dirt crossroads, but their orders were clear: hold it at all costs. James had grown up in a quiet Ohio town, where the loudest sound at night was the whistle of a train passing through. Now the nights were full of distant gunfire and the low, mournful thud of artillery. His boots were caked with mud, his uniform damp and heavy. The war had worn him down in only a few short weeks since D-Day, but it was Sergeant Miller who kept them going. Miller was a man who seemed carved from stone, thick-shouldered, unflinching, and blunt in a way that didn't invite argument. On the morning of July 14th, the fog lay heavy over the fields. James was sipping the last of his cold coffee when Miller crawled over, binoculars hanging around his neck. "They'll try something today," Miller said quietly. "Our boys to the north are pushing hard. That means the Krauts will want this road even more." James just nodded, his throat dry. He had learned early that in war, sometimes the only answer was silence. The attack came just after sunrise. It began with the eerie whistle of incoming shells. The first landed short, shaking the earth and sending a spray of dirt over the foxholes. Then the second, closer, cracked the stone wall of a nearby farmhouse in two. "Hold your fire," Miller shouted over the din, even as machine gun rounds began to tear through the hedgerows. James gritted his teeth, watching dark shapes move through the smoke. He spotted one, a German soldier, crouched and running, rifle in hand. James lined up the shot, but before he could fire, the soldier dove behind a cart. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw another figure. This one was young, shockingly young. Barely 18, maybe less. The boy's helmet was too big, slipping down over his brow. He moved hesitantly, weapon dangling low. For a moment, James forgot about the battle raging around him. The boy looked lost, like someone who'd been shoved into a nightmare without warning. Their eyes met across the field. James felt his finger tighten on the trigger, then stop. The boy's mouth moved, forming words in German, but James couldn't hear over the gunfire. He didn't shoot. The decision was made for him. A crack split the air, and the boy's head snapped back. He crumpled to the ground, rifle slipping from his grasp. James felt the breath leave his chest. Somewhere behind him, Private Harris muttered, "Got him." By mid-morning, the German push had broken. Bodies lay scattered in the mud. Smoke curled from the wreck of a truck that had tried to force its way through the village. The men were silent as they counted their own losses: 2 dead, 3 wounded badly enough to need evacuation. James sat on a pile of rubble, rubbing at his eyes. That's when he saw it. The boy's body was just yards away, half covered in mud. Something poked from his jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper. James glanced around, then walked over and pulled it free. Inside was a letter, written in neat German script. He couldn't read it, but at the bottom were 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. A child's drawing. He slipped the letter into his breast pocket and walked back without a word. Over the next days, the squad moved from village to village, each place bearing scars of the fighting: broken windows, burned barns, hastily dug graves. James carried the letter everywhere. He didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was because the boy's face still haunted him in the quiet moments before sleep. One evening, they were bivouacked in the ruins of an old barn when Miller dropped beside him. "You've been quiet," the sergeant said, chewing on a bit of bread. "You lose someone." James hesitated, then shook his head. "Not someone I knew." Miller studied him for a moment, then grunted. "In this war, you get to know people in seconds. Sometimes that's all it takes for them to matter." The war rolled on, through the hedgerows of France, across the fields of Belgium, into the bitter cold of the Ardennes. James saw men freeze to death in their foxholes during the Battle of the Bulge. He saw a church full of civilians shelled to rubble. He saw friends die and strangers save his life. Through it all, the letter stayed in his pocket, worn soft at the edges. In May 1945, when Germany finally surrendered, James was in a small Bavarian town. The streets were strangely quiet, the air heavy with relief and exhaustion. He walked past houses with broken shutters and gardens overgrown from neglect. At the edge of the town, he stopped at a small cemetery. The graves were fresh, marked with simple wooden crosses. He took the letter from his pocket and read it again, not the words, but the drawing. He found an empty patch of earth and knelt. He pressed the letter into the soil, smoothing the dirt over it with his hands. "Rest easy, kid," he whispered. When James finally boarded the ship home, he carried no souvenirs, no medals pinned to his chest. Just the memory of a boy in a field, and the understanding that in war, every victory came with a cost far greater than maps or orders could ever show.